Welcome to the M26 Fit podcast, where we explore the connection between having a strong mind and a strong body. My name is Magnus Olson, and in today's episode I sit down with Conrad Leisemann, founder and director of OzPaddle and successful real estate professional. We'll explore the current real estate market and the impact that it's having. Understand how you too can use the seasons of stepping back as a way to propel yourself forward. Learn from his insights on how daily habits are the key to maximising success and the impact compounding the small things has in creating lasting discipline over time. So strap yourself in on this fast-paced episode to enhance your success and lead a more balanced life. Welcome on the podcast, mate.
How are you, Mags?
Well, very, very well. Thank you, mate. How's your day been?
Good, mate. Really good. Busy at the moment.
Yep.
Busy in 2023. Yep. So it's starting to really kick off, which is good.
Yeah. All right. To start us off, I'm thinking let's give us a 5-minute Connie backstory.
Yep. Right from the start?
Yep.
5 minutes, that's all I got. Well, mate, so I went to Ipswich Grammar.
Yep.
Close to Brizzy. So had a heavily involved in the sports background. Went to school for cricket and rugby. So when I first finished school, I really wanted to go down that path of top-level sport. So I went and lived in the UK for 2 years and played professional cricket over there in Essex.
Nice.
From that, mate, I went to uni and did a degree in musculoskeletal therapy. So I'd always wanted to – the whole dream with that was to – if I couldn't make it in professional sport, to stay involved with it. You know, somehow I've always had that dream of being involved with professional sport at some level.
Yep.
The challenge was, mate, as I got a bit older, so I finished my degree and then started working in that field. So I owned a health centre at Carindale in Brizzy for a while. The challenge was, mate, is I quickly found out that there's only 6 professional cricket teams in Australia, and there's only about, at the time, 12 professional footy teams and 12 professional AFL teams. So, you know, the reality of it is to become a physio and get involved with top-level sport, you know, those positions are held pretty tightly. So I think the Australian cricket teams only had 3 physios in the last 30 years. So what I started to really find out is that I was stuck dealing with just mums and dads and aches and pains. And it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And then from when I had the health centre, 2 of my best mates from school also were involved in the sports field and human movement sort of background. So from that is where I started OzPaddle. So me and the boys were actually heavily involved with the adventure race scene at the time. As you know, I do a lot of kayaking, mountain biking, that sort of stuff. So we started OzPaddle. The whole dream of OzPaddle at the start was just to get people from our own fields through the health centre in the outdoors, having fun again, just getting them involved with kayaking in the outdoors. And then from there, mate, it was actually through a corporate group that I started to hang around a lot of real estate professionals. So people like yourself who are involved with the building game and that sort of thing. And then eventually, after I'd sort of had enough of being involved with the health field, mate, I actually stepped into real estate and then had real estate and OzPaddle. So, nice. And that's where we are today.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into the next question. So real estate, the market, how do you think that's changed over the last decade or so in interest rates?
Yep.
Some of those triggers?
It's a good question. You know, are you talking about from the consumer point of view, but also the real estate point of view as well?
Yes.
Both. Because I've been in it for 14 years now, since 08, 09, and it's from the real estate point of view, the actual agents themselves, it's the amount of technology we've had to embrace over that, it's significantly changed. I mean, you know yourself from your background how we transacted in real estate 14 years ago to now is just completely different.
Absolutely.
And when I started in real estate, mate, there was no emails on phones. You know, it was all we were still getting over the landlines. But, you know, I think for real estate agents, from their point of view, I think embracing technology has been really difficult for some of the older people. How we do it now in terms of just even how buyers and sellers find property now. You know, when I first got into real estate 14 years ago, realestate.com and Domain and all these platforms didn't exist.
No.
We were still selling property in the local paper and, you know, putting buyers in your car and, you know, driving them around and that sort of stuff. So, you know, from the real estate point of view, I think over the last 14 years, it's changed dramatically with technology. There's some downsides to that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. You're a lot more connected. I think for the consumer, you know, I think the challenge today is that I read an article yesterday about how the percentage of Australians that actually own property now is significantly dropping. And I think too, that's something I've really, especially during COVID, I've started to see now the struggles of young people, just being able to get into the property market, I think is something that's probably a sad fact of the modern real estate today.
Yeah.
There's an article I read yesterday that said there's less than 50% of Australian adults now own property in this country.
Wow.
So, that says to me that less than 5 out of every 10 adults will have the opportunity to actually buy a property. So look, over the last 14 years, I think now with interest rates being back where they were probably 10 years ago, I think now it's the highest rates we've had since the GFC. It's making it harder for young people to get back into the market and actually buy property. I think too there's a significant shift. I think there's a trend at the moment. I think you and I have spoken about this off air before about just even around Brisbane and the capital cities now. I think living's changing. The whole days of having a big backyard and kids playing on swings and 3, 4, 5 kids, I think those days are gone. I think you're going to find a huge percentage of children now growing up in units and townhomes.
Yeah, I agree.
Over the last you and I have spoken about this, where you did developing early on in your career, with building in those areas that I work. Have a look at the amount of unit and townhomes now in those areas compared to even 20 years ago is significant. So I think that's probably the largest trend change in the last 14 years I've seen, is the amount of people now living in unit and townhomes as opposed to properties with backyards. Everything seems to be getting smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
That's probably the two big things I see, mate, over the last 14 years.
All right, great insights. Let's talk about mental strength, mental resilience, and its importance to live a happy and balanced life. If you got any tips in your journey?
Yeah, it's just such a good question, this, Mags. It really is. I remember I was at a business conference a couple of years ago, and the ex-Australian cricket captain gave a speech, Mark Taylor.
Yep.
And he spoke about the resilience and that, I don't know if are you a cricket fan?
A little bit.
Do you remember back in the mid-90s when he was captain and he went through that really bad spell where he went something like nearly 20 tests without 100, and a lot of people said he was only keeping his position because he was captain, and the media was into him at every press conference. And he spoke at this conference I was at about the struggles he went through and with his family and the resilience he had to have to come out of that. And one of the things, and I think it's a really, really, and this comes back to the IF project a little bit that we're probably going to talk about as well. That obviously the IF project is based around the poem, the IF poem. There's a section in that poem that says, if you can treat triumph and disaster the same way, then you'll generally have a pretty level head. And Mark Taylor spoke a lot about this, about having resilience is the ability to, not get too high in the high times, but not get too low in the low times. If you can treat them both with the same respect to your life, I think you can, it keeps balance in your life, if that makes sense. I think a lot of us as human beings today have a large ebb and flow in our lives where we tend to, we have a good week or a good business transaction and we end up going on a bender for 4 days, of a high.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet the same thing when we have a couple of bad things that happen, suddenly we're in the bedroom with the curtains drawn for 2 weeks, you know what I mean? And I think there's something in that, I think, with resilience. I think the other thing too, is even at the moment, economically, there's a few people out there in Australia doing it tough at the moment. And I think it's the people that have the greatest ability to take a step backwards in life for a period of time in order to propel their life forward, I think is really important. There's that old saying that life's like a bow and arrow. You almost got to go backwards. Bow and arrow's got to be pulled backwards before it can be propelled forward. Yeah, and I think that's a really big tip, particularly for the young people today. I think we've really lost the ability to take a step backwards in order to go forwards. Yeah, I think that's a real big one. But I think that balance is what's important, not be getting too high in the high times, not getting too low in the low times.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
And how have you seen mental health impacting the property sector and real estate sector?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It was an article actually sent to me a couple of weeks ago where they said 65% of all real estate professionals now suffer some form of mental health, whether it be depression, anxiety, and the Victorian government actually just released a whole new list of industries that are now on what they call the suicide watch, or the mental health sort of worrying, or the fields that are worrying to them. Real estate was at the top of that.
Yeah, it's a real high pressured job, isn't it?
See, the challenge is we go back to what I was saying before, that 14 years ago it was different. I spoke to one of my principals, he's a really good mate of mine, John, the other week, and he's been selling real estate since the late 80s. And he said, Connie, back then, it was only landlines. There was no emails. So he said, all the local agents would finish work on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and you go to the pub, have a beer, catch up with your mates, have a chat about your week. But he said no one could get a hold of you again until 9 a.m. Monday morning. You know what I mean? Whereas now I think the problem with real estate and why it's becoming a young man's game, if you've got a wife and kids, it is 24/7 now you're attached to your phone. It's just, and I think too, a young guy said to me the other week, he was looking at getting into real estate, and he said, Connie, can you give me a piece of advice? And I said, well, this is my best advice in the modern game. You need to learn to work pub hours. He said, well, what's pub hours? And I said, 10 till 10. I said, you don't need to work in real estate, mate, before 10 a.m., but if you finish work before 10 p.m., you're probably not going to make too much money. Because, again, it comes down to that difference of, you look at the demographics of people we deal with today, particularly in my areas, find a young family right now with 2 or 3 kids that don't have a mum and dad that work 2 jobs. So the problem is, if they're going to sell their home, when do you think they can meet with their real estate agent? It's not at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They've got 2 young kids. The amount of my clients now that say, hey, Connie, can you come over at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, because that's when the kids go down, you know what I mean? So the problem, what people forget is that real estate agent that gives up that time for you, he's giving up time away from his wife or his kids to go and do that 3 nights a week. I think the big challenge too, of course, now for real estate professionals is the weekend work. Yeah. If you don't work Saturdays and Sundays, it's it's
tough.
It is tough, and it's hard on relationships, mate. I think I've spoken to you off air before about my challenges with it, in the past. So I think, look, in terms of mental health, that's the big challenge for real estate agents right now, is the connection that you have to that business 24 hours a day. The other thing too with real estate, what people forget is that for other people and other businesses, often, if you own a cafe, for example, all those clients that go to the cafe don't know the boss's phone number. You know what I mean? They don't know the bloke that owns it, his mobile, and it's not splashed up on the front.
No.
Whereas you go drive past all the homes that I've got for sale right now, guess what's on the signboard? My mobile number. You jump on realestate.com, guess where my mobile is? Front and center. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the problem is, it doesn't come with a little, in brackets, please don't call after 5 p.m. or on a Sunday. Do you know what I mean? People automatically think because your phone number is somewhere that they'll use that.
Yep.
So
24/7.
24/7.
Yeah.
And when do most families have time off? It's a Sunday. Yeah. So your phone doesn't stop. So that's probably the biggest challenge, mate. With
where do you think it's going to go? Like it's obviously not sustainable to a certain degree. Is there anything that you think that could be done about it?
The reality of it is, and I think this is probably a good thing and a bad thing, is that I don't think it can get any worse, because now we're so, you've got emails now, you've got apps, the amount of real estate agents now that are on social media as well.
Yes.
You've got Facebook, you've got Instagram, you've got your emails that are now on your phone, you've got your mobile number out there. I don't really see it getting any worse, but I think we've got to be able to put things into, it's like what we say, mate, isn't it, is that your business will consume you if you let it. And I think it's about, what we need to bring in, and look, my company, Ray White, is at the forefront of this, which is really good. They do a lot of, leadership type courses and, stress management and that sort of stuff.
In the prevention side of things.
100%, and obviously, as you know, I'm pretty big in the mental health space. So I think it comes down to a big part of, it doesn't matter whether it's in a, relationship with your wife or a relationship with your kids or the relationship with your phone and your business, you've got to have boundaries. Right. And I think it's about taking control of that. The reality of it is that, do I have to answer those phone calls on a Sunday that I get stressed over? Well, I don't. You can go, hey, listen, let's put a voicemail that today's my day off. And if you leave me a voicemail, that's fine, or send me a text, but I'm not going to get back to you until, opening of business Monday. You can do that. The reality of it is that the problem in real estate is we put the pressure on ourselves often to go, hey, we need to take that phone call, or we need to, respond to that email. And I think ignorance is bliss, isn't it? Whereas 10, 15 years ago, if someone sent you an email over the weekend and you didn't have emails on your phone, you didn't know about it until Monday. It's not that you didn't respond to it, it's just you didn't know about it until Monday, you know what I mean?
That's
Whereas
right,
now the problem with these mobile phones is that, I think often people will send you an email or a text not necessarily always expecting a response, but what we've created in society is a response within ourselves that we have to respond to that person now, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Whereas I think we've got to have the ability to put in boundaries to go, hey, this person's clearly messaged or emailed me because I'm at the top of their mind, but it's not going to kill them if I don't respond to them until 10 a.m. Monday morning. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think we all heighten our
so it's pressure on ourselves, and we need to set better boundaries.
I think so. I think we need to, and that probably starts from younger people getting into the corporate world. I don't think there's probably enough of that, at a school level or when they go into finishing university. It's just
some education around it.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Cool. Now we've got the M26 in 26. Ready?
Ready to go. Do I only get 1 minute, do I, for each one?
No, we can see
right.
how that plays out.
Yep.
So 2023, goal setting. Personally, do you think it's important or do you think it's a waste of time? What's your thoughts?
No, I think it's really important. But again, this is probably another podcast on its own. Look, with goal setting, I don't particularly like them, I'll be honest. I think it's important to have goals.
Yep.
The problem is I think if your focus is a big goal at the end, you're going to be a lot of disappointment. I'm a big believer, and look, I could share this in my phone. I have what I call daily habits. I think daily habits are more important to achieving big goals than what, because it's like that thing, isn't it? If you put a big photo up on a wall of your end goal, if it's so big and you 3 months' time you're nowhere near closer to achieving it, it actually often you forget about that goal or you get really disappointed in yourself. Yeah. You're better off having 5 or 6 daily habits on how to get. I think you've got to really break down goals into
action
small
goals.
100%. Yeah. You've got to have, I like to call them daily habits.
Yeah, okay. I might touch on that a little bit later. Yep. So who's the smartest person you sat in the room with?
Well, this would be an interesting one. 2 blokes come to mind for me with this. Sir Richard Branson.
Oh, wow.
Sir Richard Branson I had a lunch with on the Sunshine Coast many years ago now. Unbelievable human being. Just
visionary.
I just don't know how he does it with the hours in the day. He's got the same hours in the day as you and me, but he's running like 130 companies and like, mate, here I am stressed about a few phone calls on Sunday. He's a phenomenal human being.
He's a legend,
Yeah, he's unbelievable. The other one, which is probably going to surprise you, I went to a leadership course a couple of years ago in Sydney, and one of the guest speakers blew my mind was the Melbourne Storm coach, Craig Bellamy.
Oh, okay.
Hugely intelligent. And in terms of organisational and having a culture at an organisation, unbelievable. Hearing him talk about culture within your organisation. And
when you see the success that he's had with the Melbourne Storm, it's not surprising that leadership quality shines out.
What really, I agree. What really shone for me is how he has the ability to have, and this is no disrespect to any other clubs, but how a player can be at one club and be a certain level and then go under Craig Bellamy and just succeed tenfold where they were for the last 3 years. And he has the ability to do that. Yeah. Really, really great. And really intelligent guy too.
Yeah. Great answer. The most important lesson that you've ever learned?
Most important lesson? Probably just not to take things too seriously. I think one of the lessons I've learned, particularly in the last couple of years, is that pain is temporary, depression is temporary, happiness is temporary, not being happy is temporary.
And you can control them.
Yeah, 100%. I think just knowing that things, you can have a bad day, but it'll always get better. That's probably the greatest lesson I've learned.
Yeah. Yep. And in one sentence, give us your definition of discipline.
Daily habits repeated over and over again. That's it.
Yep.
Yep.
What about the greatest decision you've ever made?
Greatest decision I ever made was probably to go as a young guy, as an 18-year-old, to go live overseas on my own for a couple of years. It was I think that sort of set the tone a lot for my 20s and 30s. Yeah. Just learning to live on your own, different country without mum and dad.
It's a bold step.
Was nervous. Yeah. I don't know how it would have gone if I had gone to a non-English speaking country, but I think every kid, mate, should be forced to travel, to be honest, especially on their own at a young age. I think.
So you grew up fast when you got over there?
Yep, you have to. I was living on my own in a unit. I think too, there's a lot of pressure on an 18-year-old if you're playing professional sport because you're kind of like they're paying for you to be there. There's a lot of hype around the club I was at and the local area. So I think you learn to deal with that. See, I dealt with stuff when I was 18, 19 that probably people didn't have to deal with until their late 20s if they had stayed here.
Yeah.
So that was a great learning curve.
Yeah. Yep. 3 words to describe what it's like selling real estate.
Roller coaster ride. Yeah, roller coaster ride, mate. That's all it is. Ups and downs.
Yeah. What gives you inspiration?
Touched on this off air, mate, actually, at the start with you. One thing that really gives me inspiration is seeing ordinary people do amazing things.
Yeah.
I think we hear a lot about famous people that were either born into, rich families or whatever it might be. They're not the people that really inspire me. It's the people that came from humble beginnings that turn that humbleness into greatness and keep that, though. That's what really inspires me. Yeah.
That consistency to keep it, because getting to the top is one thing, but then maintaining it's the question, isn't it?
And just seeing ordinary people achieve things, though, that other people don't think they can be achieved, that's what inspires me. Yeah.
Awesome. You have a favourite saying?
This would be a funny one. My favourite saying and all my mates will back me up on this when they ring me, when they say, Connie, how's your day going? And I'll say, mate, I can't complain. And when I do, no one fucking listens. So you just got to get on with life, haven't you?
Yeah.
That's my favourite thing.
Yeah, well said. So you've been doing OzPaddle adventures now for ages. And what are some of the benefits to individuals and corporate groups you think getting out there on the water for a paddle?
And the biggest thing is something we've been touching on here this morning, mate, is the ability, I think, when you go out on the water. I mean, you paddled with me this morning.
Yeah, mate, awesome.
Yeah, is being able to switch off. You know, we live in a world now where we're always connected to everything, whether it's your family, your kids, your business, your everything with your mobile phone. You know, I'll tell a quick story if I can.
Yeah.
Took a group this year, as you know, up to the Great Barrier Reef. And what they didn't realise was we had 18 clients up there. It was the biggest group we've ever done. Actually, we had 18 clients up in the Great Barrier Reef. And they all thought this is going to be this amazing trip. We shipped them all over to Whitehaven Beach. What they didn't realise was the first 3.5 days we were there, they had no mobile reception. And can I tell you, all 18 of them commented on it. They all said, Connie, like, and one of the ladies was really funny.
As a positive?
As a positive.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the ladies, because she'd come from a corporate world down here to up there being on this holiday. And she said, Connie, I never realised how the addiction I had to my phone until, speaking of my phone, I never realised the addiction I had to my phone until the first day we were on that trip. I actually had anxiety because I didn't have any mobile reception, and she was wondering like what emails I had to get back to. But she said by the second and third day, she was like, oh my God, this is bliss. Yeah. Like, how amazing is this? And I think it really reminded people, but it was also a really good message coming back to me from people.
Yep.
It just reaffirmed the importance of having days where you're just technology free. Just get away from it. Go back to, I mean, we didn't have it 30 years ago, and we always lie on the beach and be pretty happy, didn't we?
Yep.
Whereas now we all lie on the beach and we're all taking photos and checking emails. And so that I think that's the biggest thing, mate, with the outdoor business and where I want to take it further, you know, in conversations that I've even had with you, is that just getting people back out in the outdoors, having fun and disconnecting from technology, but reconnecting with the natural world, which we're all supposed to do.
Yeah, and people.
People, the natural world, I think, is the greatest filter you can have in the world.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I enjoy, obviously, with those paddles that we do in the mornings, just to get out there and the bit of banter between the guys out on the river.
And isn't it nice? Like we all throw a bit of banter out on social media, or you're reading stuff on Instagram, or you're scrolling. But being out on the river, you're actually having real conversations with blokes. You know,
it's much more interactive, much more fun.
Yeah, 100%. And being able to do it without technology in your face, I just think it's a bonus, mate.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
What role do you think consistency plays in success?
Huge. The thing is, I think with consistency is that, you know, there was a video I watched recently. There was a retired Navy SEAL. I don't know if you've seen this, went viral on YouTube. And they asked him this question. It's similar, you asked me this. And he said he's been in the Navy for 30 years. And they asked him the question, if there's one thing that you would be pushing on kids today, or that's different from 30 years ago, what would it be? And he said, I'd make every parent just tell their kids to make their bed every day. Because I think the thing with discipline is it's the small things that make the big things more important.
100%.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like, you know, you don't have to suddenly have these big goals and think that you've got to spend hours and hours doing these daily activities. It's the small things that, you know, that create discipline over a long period of time. Yep. You know, and it starts with things like making your bed, you know, and I think that is the most important thing. If you can have, I think too many people make things a chore rather than making them just a daily habit. You know, often I use that analogy about brushing your teeth. You know, we all, how funny is it? We all spend 10, 15 minutes a day brushing our teeth, right? But it's the most boring thing we do in the world. But why do we actually do it? Because when we were little kids, our mum and dad said to us, what's the last thing you do before you go to bed? You brush your teeth, right? What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? You brush your teeth. Why can't we apply that to everything in our life? Do you know what I mean? So I always say it's the small things together that make the discipline, the big things work. Yeah.
Well said. Briefly share a personal or professional setback challenge and how you got through it.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I'd always had back problems as a kid, growing up with cricket. You know, it's common, and then I'd re-injured it playing footy. And then, of course, coupling that with kayaking as well. So I had stress fractures a lot as a kid that I had to overcome. And then when I got to my mid-30s, got worse and worse. And I ended up having a motorbike accident, which I've told you about. And I ended up breaking 2 bones in my lower back. And it was a really tough period because so I ended up having to have surgery. So I ended up having spinal fusion in my mid-30s, which is, again, is a surgery that often you don't see until you're in your 60s and 70s to prolong, you know, spinal life. So it was quite unique, even speaking to my surgeon, to have that large surgery so young. And that was tough for me because it also coupled with the start of COVID. So I couldn't feel my left leg for the last 6 months leading into my surgery. And I was supposed to have my surgery in March 2020, just as COVID was hitting. And of course, what happened was all the elective surgery was cancelled, so it put it off longer. So I ended up having surgery until July in 2020. And mate, that's probably the hardest thing I've had to get over in my life, because you don't realise, you take a lot of things for granted. Like, we sit here and talk about discipline and, doing the small habits. But for me, a lot of my discipline, like getting up and going for kayaking training in the morning, it's not only a discipline, but it's something I really enjoy. And to have that taken away from you for a period of time, or being told you may not be able to do it again, was really, really scary. And it was only my close mates and my close family that really saw what I went through, because, mate, I couldn't kayak or anything for months. I've been off the bike for 2 years. I wasn't allowed to ride my bike for over 12 months because the surgeons were worried about, falling off and that sort of stuff. Because I ended up having 2 discs removed in my lower back, and I had I've got 2 plates and 4 screws now in my lower back. So, mate, that just the significance of that to my life, having to just the rehab as well, having to get back, and it's really it made me realise how much you take for granted, in life, and
you don't have your health, you don't have anything,
mate. 100%. So it's really given me a new outlook on life now that I'm 2 years up. I'm 2 years on from my surgery now, and I'm back to 100%.
Oh, awesome.
So
back into the training, but that was obviously must have been a really tough time to go through that, particularly over COVID.
Oh, mate, it was massive, and look, I'm happy to talk about it with people. Maybe it's another podcast, but stuff I have. My close friends, like I said, knew about it, but I turned to alcohol a lot during that period because we were stuck in lockdowns. I was stuck on a couch, couldn't move. I wasn't allowed to drive, mate. For over a month. So that was a really tough period for me, tougher than probably what a lot of people knew that I was going through. And like I said, I turned to the bottle a bit then and became really unfit, really unhealthy, just completely away from what a lot of my good mates now, like you, know Connie for. Very different then. And I went through that for probably a good 12 months. Turned a lot of drugs and alcohol during that period. So, having come out of that now and being where I am now, I'm, it's just in a much better place.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how does being fit and healthy make you more productive, do you think?
It's the old saying, isn't it? I think, there's a saying that says, nutrition is the fuel, exercise is the spark, but without both, you can have no flame. It's really true, and I think, it's
a great saying.
Oh, it's massive, and you can't out-train a bad diet, and I think, what you put in your body determines how you feel, but what you then do with your body determines what you look like. And I think if you can look better than, look a way you want to look, and you feel the way you want to feel, then I think how you're not going to be more productive. And the thing is too, as stupid as this sounds, we all know it, but we don't do it. It's like we all know if you sit on the couch for a weekend eating pizza and polish off 3 bottles of red wine, well, how productive are you on Monday? Like, you feel like shit, right? But if you have, you and I go for a ride in a kayak and eat healthy all weekend, then how good do you feel?
Yeah, we're flying.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think productivity, mate, starts with what you do before you start your day and when you finish your day, doesn't it?
Yeah. So when you're not working or paddling, what are some of the other things that you like to enjoy doing?
I'm a massive reader. I read a lot, which a lot of people don't know. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to reading.
Okay.
So I've got a heap. It's really funny, mate. This is one of my habits, right? So I read probably 20 to 30 pages of a book every night before I go to bed.
Yep.
Sometimes more if I'm in the mood. But so I have a bit of a goal with. I've got in my notes section of my phone. I have books I want to read. I've got about 90 at the moment that I want to read. But at any given time, I have the next 5 books that I'm going to read on my bedside table.
So that's part of the daily habits.
Daily habits, mate. Yep, yeah. Absolutely. I'm a big reader. I haven't got into, a lot of my mates have turned to Audible books. I haven't really got into that yet. I prefer to listen to podcasts.
Yep.
But big reader.
Okay, cool. And where's Connie 5 years from now?
I shouldn't be saying this, my boss might hear this, but in 5 years' time, I honestly probably want to be out of real estate. I'll still be connected to the industry forever.
Yep.
Probably similar to yourself, buying and selling property, but my big dream, mate, is definitely moving forward with the OzPaddle business. For the last, 8 years, 10 years that we've had it, it's really always just been a passion project for us. It's just been part-time, getting people in the outdoors, connecting like-minded people. I actually think there's a lot more to the business than that. And, you and I have spoken off air about that.
I agree.
And I think too, you know what, now I think with COVID, I've never, and I've said this to you off air before, I think right now the world needs stuff like OzPaddle more than ever before in history. I think the one thing that COVID showed people, you know, we've spoken a lot about it off air with the lockdowns and even what was going on overseas, look how human beings reacted when they were locked up. And didn't it show people the importance of being able to go to the beach or being able to get in the outdoors?
Yep.
So I think if we can create more avenues, not only for people our age, but younger people coming through to get them in the outdoors and get a love of the outdoors and
Absolutely.
get an affection with the outdoors and just to see the benefits of it, that's going to benefit humanity forever, right?
Yeah.
So that's my big mission right now over the next 5 years is to really get that business up and running to a point where it's full-time for me and I can step out of real estate.
Yeah, no, wish you all the best. I reckon it's a great passion.
Yep.
What's the most common mistake that you see people making when they're buying property, do you think?
Really good question, this. The two parts to this, I see it a lot at the moment with investors. The biggest mistake I see with investors is looking at property with from the point of view of could they live there? Well, it doesn't matter whether you're going to live there or not because, you know, I own property in parts of Brisbane that I would never live in, but they're good investments, if that makes sense. So I think from an investor point of view is taking the emotion out of it and looking at the facts and figures of it, if it's a good buy.
Purely commercial decision.
100%. And I think too many people cross over the two. You know, they go, oh, I don't really like it here. It's like, well, you don't need to like it here because you're not living here. Do you know what I mean? That's probably for the investor. I think for the owner-occupiers at the moment, you know, I think, again, you and I have probably spoken a little bit about this off air too. I think with the young people right now is the inability to start at the bottom is a big mistake. You know, we all talk about it with our parents. You know, Dad says to me, mate, your mother and I, our first house was like a caravan. But we stayed there for a while, paid it off for over a few years, and then we upgraded. You know, we stayed there for a few years, and then mate, the amount of young people I see is their first home, and they're in their 20s, and they're buying a $1.6 million house somewhere, and then whinging that they can't afford boiled eggs. It's like, well, guys, you didn't have to buy the $1.6 million house, did you? So, you know, I think that's probably the biggest mistake I see is the people that want everything in their first home.
Yeah, not prepared to start at that bottom where you need to.
What was your first house, mate?
Exactly.
Tell us. Probably wasn't a palace. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest mistake, mate, is I think having the ability to probably start lower than where they need to be. Yeah. But I think it's also really important to have that as a dream, though. Now, this is the house we want, which is fine with that, but we don't need to start there.
No.
You know, it should be stepping stones. And I think you actually have a more productive and happy life over that period by doing that as well. Less pressure on you.
Exactly.
Yep.
Definition of happiness.
That's a really good one, isn't it? I think happiness is having the ability to understand that life isn't perfect. I think if you can be in that space to understand that, because I think in today's world, particularly with social media, with the young people, it's like everything has to be perfect. And if it's like, if I'm not perfect, then I'm not happy. Yeah. But happiness comes in imperfections, right? You know what I mean? So
exactly.
I think that is a really, really big, I think, lack of understanding a lot of young people have. And the problem with social media is in that, I guess, that viewpoint. And there's a really good book actually called The Happiness Trap. I don't know if you've read it.
No, not yet.
Go and read it. It's called The Happiness Trap. And they talk about it a lot in there. How often do you and I hear young people say, I'll be happy?
When?
Correct. And they finish that statement with when. It's when I have the Audi or when I have the car or when I have those shoes or when I have that boat or whatever it might be. It's always when. And I think happiness has to be in contentment and peace within your own mind and understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be happy.
So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Journey, 100%. Embrace the journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Habits, we've touched on some of yours. You name some more of your good habits, and do you have any bad habits?
Look, one of my habits I've embraced recently, actually, which I think is a real big one, is, and I've actually spoken to you about this, is we often hear people talk about if you master your morning, master your day. Yep. That's been thrown on its head for me lately because I think you've got to be able to master your night before to master your morning.
The 5 a.m. club.
Yeah, 100%. And you and I have spoken about this, haven't we, where you can join the 5 a.m. club and have that as a habit. But if you're not getting to bed till 1 a.m., doesn't matter if you join the 5 a.m. club, you're going to wreck your day. So I think it's about really my greatest habit is probably, just mastering that night before stuff. And those habits, start with reading your book before bed. I think a big one for me, mate, which I've embraced, which I think is really positive, and actually I think I read it recently in a book, actually, that's where I got it from, is we live in a digital world today, and I think the greatest habit is after 8 p.m. turning to analog. I think I've said that to you before off air, haven't I? Where
I read the same thing. That's the last thing I do before I go to bed is read my book.
Yep. I think if you can get to 8 p.m. and turn all the digital stuff off, because it's funny, because 30 years ago we didn't have all this, iPads in beds and, phones and all that sort of stuff. I think for me, the greatest habit I've embraced, and I was doing that for a little while, where I'd get up at 5 a.m. like you and I do, and we train, but often I'd be on my phone till midnight. And then I'd wonder why 1 p.m. the next day I'm gassed.
You're not mastering your morning.
100%. So I think, it's all good and well mastering your morning, but you've got to master that night before. And I think that starts, it's funny, for 2023, mate, we talk about goals. I've set up daily habits for 2023. And the first one on my daily habit is no phone or social media after 8 p.m.
Yep.
But nothing before 8 a.m. either.
Yeah. So was any bad habits that you got that you want to try and get rid of in 23, do you think?
Better diet.
Yeah.
Less alcohol. Yeah, look, the last couple of years, again, that probably goes back to my back surgery, mate. I probably, with lockdown and that sort of stuff, a big part of my goals this year is just getting really clean and healthy again. And, you and I have spoken about a lot about how you feel, what dictates how you feel is what you put in your body.
Yeah.
You can do all the training in the world, mate, but if you're having 3 bottles of red wine a week and, putting shit fuel in there, then you're not going to feel your best. So for me, mate, the real big habits moving into 2023, better diet.
Yep.
Cleaner.
Yeah.
Getting to bed earlier.
Yeah. I think we can all do a little bit more of that, can't we?
Absolutely,
yeah.
mate, 100%.
What's the best advice that you've ever received?
Best advice that I've ever received? It's a really good question, that. I think the best advice I've received is touching on what I spoke about at the start, is that just, and this comes back to the Rudyard Kipling with the poem, if you can learn to treat triumph and disaster in your life the same way, I think you'll always master it. I think that's honestly the best advice that I've received, and something I truly believe in, is just not getting too high in the high times, not getting too low in the low times, and trying to keep that level-headedness. Then, I think I just think you're going to be happier in your life all the way through. And I think that's really, really big for everyone, I think.
Yeah.
Probably the best advice I've got.
All right. Your biggest regret, if you have any?
Yeah, as hard as this is to look back on, I was thinking about this actually in the last couple of weeks. My biggest regret's probably not appreciating not necessarily the talent without sounding arrogant, but just not appreciating, what God had given me so early on in life, and not tackling it, like
natural talents.
Yeah, I'll tell a quick story. So I went to school with Shane Watson, who obviously played cricket for Australia, went a lot further than me and some of our mates. But, I look at Shane, and it wasn't just natural talent with him. He was a unbelievable trainer. He was always the first to training. He knew he had a talent. There's no doubt about that. But what he did with that talent was just unbelievable compared to others. Whereas I sort of got to an age where, you find girls, you find alcohol, all that sort of stuff, and you probably took a lot of that for granted. If I had one regret, it would be not working hard enough when I was younger.
Yeah.
I think I probably you're always in the back of your mind wonder whether you could have gone further with, whether it be cricket or footy, and we've got a whole world of them, haven't we? We're all a bunch of has-beens at the pub, mate, or could have and should have and would have. We've got a heap of them, but that's probably my biggest regret, mate, is not realising that, when you're playing first grade cricket or first grade footy at such a young age, the opportunity that was put in front of you to potentially go further, and you kind of wasted that a little bit. If I could go back knowing what I know now, I think I would have trained a lot harder, worked a lot harder, and would have loved to. I'm not saying I would have gone any further, but I would have given myself a better opportunity.
Yeah. Yep. So what's a typical week in the life of Conrad Leisemann look like?
Chaos. No, I'm kidding. No. It's pretty structured these days. I mean, as you know, mate, having 2 businesses, it is tough juggling the two sometimes. But, mate, normally early mornings I'm up and out the door at 5:15, 5:30, as you know, and I sort of tend to change it up between run, ride, and bike at the moment. Run, ride, and kayak. So training in the mornings with one of those disciplines. So I'm back doing some adventure races this year. So doing a fair bit of training with that. And then normally, mate, I'm in the office from 8:30 in the morning when I get back, and then real estate till sort of 5 or 6 at night. And then that's about it, mate.
Yep.
That's the day. Go home, answer some more emails, take the dog for a walk, read some books, and that's about it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we touched on this just before, but what impact, if we just get a little bit deeper on it, just that nutrition and diet having on performance?
Yep. Yeah, again, mate, it goes back to that saying that I said before, nutrition is is the fuel for everything.
Yeah. So particularly when you're now getting back to training, for example, you find that obviously your diet's got to change, so you've got that extra nutrition to be able to have the stamina to be able to do that training?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, it all connects in, isn't it? I mean, if you don't, the reality of it is, I think if you don't fuel your body correctly, then you can't train as hard, especially as you get a bit older. But I think too, I actually, and I'd recommend this to everybody, I actually went and seeked out some professional advice on this. I think you can listen to all the podcasts and read all the books, but something recently that got introduced to me through a mate of mine who's actually a sports physiologist, which I never knew anything about, mate, to be honest, Mags, is training for your body type. I've actually read that book, Eating for Your Blood Type, but he talks a lot about, understanding the different body types, mesomorph, ectomorph, all that sort of stuff. Again, that's probably a podcast for another day.
Yeah.
But, just understanding that and how, because one of the things 10 years ago, I had a lot of liver and pancreas problems. One of the things I've learned is my body's actually quite insulin sensitive. So if I load up on carbs, I tend to, it just doesn't sit well with me.
Doesn't work for you.
Doesn't work for me. So that was one of the things in my diet this year. We've cut out a lot of those, sort of high insulin type carbohydrates. So white breads, white rice, all that sort of stuff. And going back to a more, for me anyway, in my body type, it's about fueling it with more natural type foods, anything that you can pick off a tree or dig up out the ground. So I eat a lot of, fruits, veggies, eggs, that sort of stuff.
So anything that's not in a packet.
Correct. They say that, don't they? You should, when you walk into Woolies, you should stick to the outside aisles because that's where all the fresh food is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, mate, I tend to have, a lot sort of healthier diet these days with fruit, veggies, lean meats, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's good. Yep. What makes you laugh?
Magnus Olson. What makes me laugh? Mate, just you know what? I don't know if it makes me laugh or makes me happy. I mean, going and see Carl Barron makes me laugh. But just hanging around with your mates on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon, mate, having a few beers, telling some jokes, taking the piss out of people. You know me, I'm a bit of a piss taker. That's what makes me laugh, mate. Yeah. Seeing mates fall in the Brisbane River.
I was going to say.
That's what makes me laugh. When one of your mates buys a kayak for the first time, thinks he's a hero, takes it down the Brisbane River on his own and falls in, that's what makes me laugh. You can ask him that question.
No, I will.
You,
Childhood idol. Did you have any of those when you were growing up?
Yeah, I did. Again, for me being a sports background, mate, my idols were all, obviously footy and cricket based. So big one for me was Ben Choon in the rugby. Played rugby for Australia. He was a bit of a hero of mine. And Justin Langer.
Okay.
And, even seeing Justin Langer, I read his book actually not too long ago. Just to see his toughness, mate, and what he come through, the adversity and stuff like that was always an idol for me. I think Justin Langer at the time, obviously in his chosen career, had a lot of disappointments along the way, but seeing how he come out of that and the career that he had, I think is really inspiring. Yeah. So he's probably my idol. Yep.
The top 3 books. So you say you do a fair bit of reading. You've got top 3?
Jeez, it's hard, mate, to narrow down the top 3. Okay, I'll give you 3 from a different perspective of each.
Yep.
I'm someone a little bit like you. I'm a bit spiritual and read a few, as weird as this sounds, I read a few like books on relationships and that sort of stuff, relationships with yourself and others. One book recently that I read, it actually got recommended to me by a female friend. It's called Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man by Steve Harvey.
I heard of it.
If you've got daughters or if you've got a wife, you need to read it. It's sort of, that book years and years ago that went crazy, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Yeah, similar sort of thing to that. But he actually wrote it as a memoir to his daughters, which is really, really interesting. So that book's really, really good. The other one, mate, speaking about happiness, I actually just finished this for the second time. It's called The Happiest Man Alive. I don't know if you heard of it. It's by Eddie Yarko. No. So he actually died during COVID. He was the oldest living Jew from World War II. And it's actually his life story about,
How
living
old was he?
100 and something. Well, he was obviously in World War II with the Germans. Eddie Yarko is his name. He actually, funnily enough, a lot of people don't realise this. So I read his book. It's called The Happiest Man Alive. And he actually tackles all the stuff we're talking about, when you read his life and what he went through, yet he still thinks he's the happiest man now walking the earth. He actually passed away in, I think, 2021 during COVID at 100 and something years of age. But in 2019, they flew him to Australia and he actually did a TED Talk in Sydney on happiness. And it was the largest and longest standing ovation that anyone's ever got. Mate, they gave him like a 10-minute standing ovation. So
it's all mindset.
Really inspiring guy, mate, to see. And I'll tell you what, I'll challenge anyone, if you read the first 3 chapters of the book and don't cry, you're not a human being. Because what he went through in his life was just, horrific. Great man, though.
All right.
That Happiest Man Alive. The other one I just finished reading, which is amazing. I recommend to everyone, is You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
That is a cracker.
Cracker. I just started Ant Middleton's book, so I've heard that's really good as well.
Yeah. Which one?
The first one.
Yeah. No, I read that last year. It's a good book too. So, he's a pretty inspirational guy too.
What do you think of David Goggins?
Mate, absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Isn't he tough as nails?
Yeah, I've just bought his second book.
Did you? Yeah. So, that's I haven't read his second one yet, but I want it.
Yeah. No, get through that. Awesome. We're getting towards the end, mate. Number 25, game-changing tip or advice that you've got for us.
Game-changing tip or advice. This, again, I'm probably repeating myself here, but I would say to people, there's a lot of people I see, especially at the start of the year, and you're probably seeing it even with my OzPaddle business, how many people start New Year's resolutions, right? And they change these big habits. These people that get out of bed at 8 o'clock and suddenly now they join the 5 a.m. club and wonder why they get to February and go, geez. So my biggest tip or advice to people would be to, when you change habits, start small.
Yep.
Because, if you're someone who, I was dealing with a friend actually this week, funnily enough, who's got this big New Year's resolution, wants to get fit, wants to get healthy. But prior to the whole of 2022, they got out of bed at 8 a.m. every morning to get to work by 9, right? Now they've suddenly gone, I'm going to be a 5 a.m. club member like Mags and Connie. Yeah. And they've set their alarm for the first 2 weeks of January at 5 a.m. Do you reckon they're sick of it now? Do you know what I mean? And I said to them, you're just going to give it up. I think the biggest tip I could give to people is, if you're an 8 a.m. person, set your alarm for the next 2 weeks at 7:30.
Yeah. 2
weeks after that, set it for 7.
Little by little.
2 weeks after that, guess what? You're going to get out of bed at 6:30 and train for an hour before work. And because now you've got the time, right? 2 weeks after that, you're going to set it for 6. 2 weeks after that, do it for 2 weeks at 5:30, right? By the time we get to March or April, you're now going to have a habit in place of getting out of bed at 5 to 5:30, right? Yeah. So my biggest tip of advice is to not bite off more than you can chew so quickly. Yeah. See it as a journey.
Great advice. Finish this sentence. I believe
if you surround yourself with good people and you're a good person yourself, then you'll be successful in life. There you go. How's that?
Mate, well said.
You good with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mate, it's been absolutely pleasure having a chat, mate, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your insights with us today. And, mate, looking forward to plenty of paddling with you later in the year. Thank you.
Absolutely, mate. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, cheers.
Cheers, Mags.
Thank you for joining in on today's episode, and I hope this Strong Mind, Strong Body series empowers and inspires you. Make sure you've subscribed to our channel and leave a comment if you enjoyed today's podcast. You can also check out our website for more info about M26 Fit at m26fit.au.